My name's Corinne Brad, and today I've got a beautiful project for you. This is a nice pennant design quilt, but it's not a traditional pennant design quilt. It is done, some would say almost slapdash. Because if you're like me, you suddenly get someone going, oh, such and such has had a baby. Can you make a quilt? And you want to do something that looks impressive, but you've only got 2 days to do it in. So the hardcore quilters among you will not be happy with the fact that my points are truncated. But those of you that like a quick, easy project that you can literally rustle up in probably less than a couple of days will love this, because it's easy to cut, it's easy to sew, it's easy to put together. What you need to start with is a template like this, which I'll put in the description below, but essentially it's an A5 sheet. It's had 2.5 centimetres taken off that side, 2.5 centimetres taken off the top, and a triangle cut out of the bottom. The reason it's done like that is so that you can stack up your A5 pieces of fabric, like so. And you can get a quilter's rule. If you stack up your piece of fabric, make sure you stack them up correctly. You can get your quilter's rule and your rotary cutter and put your glasses on so you can actually read the measurements on your rotary cutter. Ruler? I'm going to cut it this way. So you cut 2.5 centimetres off this side. Checking the blade in your rotary cutter is not blunt is always a good sign as well. You then take 2.5 centimetres from the top. I knew there was something I meant to do before I came into work today. And then the easiest way to do your triangle out the bottom is literally to fold your template and your fabric in half. And cut your angle like so. Now what you'll notice with this is all these pieces have been cut, but there is no seam allowance on any of it. So your block will actually come up about 1.5 centimetres smaller in both directions to A5. And that also explains why your bottom point is slightly truncated. But when you look at it as an overall picture, it doesn't really matter that much. So you've got your pennant shapes, you've got your triangle shapes, you've got your long strips and your short strips. Here's some others that I've cut before. Lay them out on your table and essentially mix and match the strips. So I'm going to start with this floral print, and I'm going to have a nice dark contrast. So do the first things first, which is to sew this triangle back into the bottom. If you look here, what you'll need to do is make sure that when you place this triangle right sides together against this angle, you've got 5 millimetres or your seam allowance excess, and just pin it. You will see why in a minute. This is because the project itself has no built-in seam allowance. You've got to make one. So sew. And sew don't sew right to the end of that triangle. Stop about 5mm before the end and back stitch. Finger press that out. And then what you need to do is manipulate that triangle. And the other thing that helps is if you just cut up to that stitch on the back so that your fabric can bend. So effectively you're folding your fabric at 45 degrees here, so that you can then sew from the top of that point So you've now got the bottom of your pennant. The next thing to do is to sew the top. And this is a simple sew. It should match up perfectly. And then you want to sew your long strip, I would say down the left-hand edge. You can sew it down the right-hand edge. The quilt looks much better if you're consistent with the side that you sew it together. And you want to line it up to the top of the short strip you've just sewn on there. And now what you see what I mean about the fact that there is no built-in seam allowance on this block. And what you're actually going to get is you're going to get an excess of fabric at the end, which you'll need to trim away. But it's one of those things that I don't know about you, I seem to spend hours cutting things perfectly with the right amount of seam allowance. And I would rather waste a little bit of fabric than spend hours laboriously cutting, because sewing and mixing colours together is by far the nicest part of quilt making. Give that a good press. Try and make sure that you're pressing your seams to the darker side of the fabric so that when it's assembled you don't see them. It's especially good if you're working with lawn fabrics. And then just take a rotary cutter and a quilter's rule. Make sure it's square and chop that excess off, because then you don't have to worry about where you're matching things up to. And that's why your points are truncated, because you've cut the bottom of them off essentially. And then it's really easy to sew together. Several squares, match them up and stitch them. And I've found one of the easiest ways, and when I first started making quilts and making quilts in blocks, was you sew together things in pairs, and then you sew the pairs together in blocks, and then you sew the blocks together in pairs. Because what you do is you match up the central seam each time, so that if there is a lot of discrepancy in the size of your blocks, you can even it out across the fabric simply by giving it a bit of a stretch on one side and not the other. So 2 pairs, and then when you match it up into a block, just check that your seams align. And there you go. So you've got all your pennants facing in the right direction. You've got all of your half borders in the right direction. And the only thing that makes this different from a traditional pennant block is the fact that you don't have a sharp point at the end. You do have just a truncated point, but do you know what? It's a small sacrifice for the amount of time you save cutting it with the added seam allowance. So I hope you enjoyed that project. I hope you like this quilt. This is actually, this fabric's quite lovely. This would be nice for a not such a girly girl's bedroom. Come and see us again very, very soon. We've got more ideas for you in the pipeline. We're filming on a regular basis, and it's lovely to hear from you. So please drop us a comment below, and I will put the diagram also for this in the description below the video. Thanks for watching. See you again very soon. If you've been inspired to create, please share your makes with us in the comments section below. And if you've enjoyed videos by the Crafts channel, hit the like button. Want to see more of us? Then click subscribe. See you next time.